Honor Among Thieves is the first big-budget mainstream D&D movie to be released since 2000's Dungeons & Dragons, which slaps, by the way, and I will die on that hill.
Let their blood rain from the sky!
And it is very D&D. I've been running games of Dungeons & Dragons for about a decade now, and even if I'm not extremely well versed in the movie's setting, that being the Forgotten Realms, because I mostly run homebrew games, I am extremely familiar with D&D archetypes, classes, races, spells, and a fair amount of the lore behind the game. First off, I will say straight up, I really liked this movie. I thought it was a ton of fun. Its strengths are definitely in its production design and its action set pieces. The costumes, the animatronics, and the sets are all beautiful and impressive, especially the Dragonborn. I loved the costumes for the Dragonborn. They looked incredible. There's also a healthy mix of digital and practical effects. Some of the CGI effects were more believable than others, but overall this movie looked great from a production standpoint. There's just some genuinely stunning work. The set pieces, that being the action scenes, are great, especially the chase sequences. The fights themselves are fine. I thought they were entertaining enough, but I think with all the creativity that was on display throughout the movie, the fights could have used a little bit more flair, with the exception of the final fight though. That one was sick. But specifically, the chase sequences. There were a lot of chase sequences. Our heroes have to run from a lot of both monsters and people throughout the movie, and to me, those are probably the most exciting scenes, especially the one in the middle that involved the druid. No spoilers, but if you know, you know. The cast was also pretty solid. I'm a big fan of Chris Pine. I think he's a massively underrated actor, and he does a solid job in this movie. It's not a standout performance, but it works well for this specific story. Michelle Rodriguez, Justice Smith, and Sophia Lillis are also all solid, but the standouts to me are Hugh Grant and Rege-Jean. Hugh Grant brought this manic yet charming energy, and Rege-Jean was hilariously stoic. I thought they were both great and stole the show every time that they were on screen. I do want to talk about a few of the things that I didn't like as much. I thought a lot of the humor in this movie is pretty hit or miss. There's some good jokes, but there's also a lot that don't really work, especially in the first half. It feels like it's trying to be a Marvel movie where they just throw in witty banter for the sake of it. And don't get me wrong, the movie is pretty funny. The Speak with Dead clip that they released early is great, and there's a joke involving an illusion that got a big laugh. But for a large percentage of the movie, it just felt like they were trying a little too hard to be witty. The emotional core also falls flat for me. Edgin, whose name I thought was pronounced Edgin until I actually saw the movie, which I thought was pretty funny for a bard, has a subplot that is meant to be the thing that people can relate to, that make them connect to and feel for him. And that part of the script doesn't really work. It was a good idea and a useful technique in storytelling, but in this case, I don't think it was executed particularly well. Those were most of the big things that stood out to me as like the best and worst parts of the movie. But I did leave out the best part. Timber Show. This big, pudgy guy completely stole the show. He's not in the movie for long, but from his first scene to his last, I was absolutely enamored. I love this big, chunky boy, and I'm so glad that he caught the stick. But let's take off the film critic hat, and let's put on the Dungeon Master hat. This is probably the most D&D that has ever D&D'd in a D&D movie. Granted, that's not a high bar, but still. While it doesn't always follow the rules of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, that's fine. No game of 5th edition follows the 5th edition rules. The rule of cool is very much reigning supreme in Honor Among Thieves, from unlimited wild shapes to attuning to magical items being a challenge in and of itself. I think they did a really great job balancing the rules of the game with keeping the story moving and visually engaging. A lot of the rules in D&D aren't particularly visually exciting, but Honor Among Thieves does a pretty good job in walking that tightrope, staying as true as possible to the game while keeping the movie fun and exciting for people unfamiliar with the game. But what this movie captures is the spirit of a lot of D&D games. You've got tragic backstories, backstabbing NPCs, tons of awesome monsters, you got magic items, a magic arena, and you got dark wizards trying to conquer the world. You've also got a plucky band of scoundrels who wind up being the only ones who can save the day. The way the party solves problems is also very D&D. The way they fully just abuse magic items outside their intended purpose in really brilliant and creative ways felt so real to me as a DM. There's a scene with a magic portal and a carriage that it felt like something straight out of one of my games. I think this is a great entry point for people who have no idea what D&D is. It displays a lot about what folks really love about this game and other games like it. I hope in the future that there are some D&D inspired movies that take themselves a little more seriously. For example, I hear Joe Manganiello is making a live-action Dragonlance series, so I'm really looking forward to that. But I understand sometimes you need a lighter, funnier version of something to break it into the mainstream. But also, the silly, fun stuff is what a lot of people really love about D&D, so that's great too. Something else I really appreciated was how there was basically no condescending fourth wall breaking, if that makes sense. Like, for example, in Marvel movies, it's really common for them to make jokes about how the names are stupid or the world building is silly. And I'm not a big comics guy, but that felt really patronizing. Like, people love those comics, and yeah, they're silly, but you don't gotta be like that. There is very little, if any, of that in Honor Among Thieves. The movie knows that it's silly and that a lot of the stuff in it is silly, but it never feels like the world or the source material is the joke, which personally I feel like is a bit of a breath of fresh air with Hollywood movies. So if you're a fan of D&D, the Forgotten Realms, or just fun adventure movies, I would recommend you see this one. It's nothing incredible or groundbreaking, but it is a fun movie with some good laughs and some great action. If you're interested in how D&D can build stories and narratives, then the rest of my channel might be something that you'd be interested in. You can start with a video I made a while back about how you can become a great Dungeon Master. Shout out to my channel members, Beefa Fox, Caleb Eggensberger, Xenon, Ali Silem, Wellaboot1, FireGen1, and Weston Bradshaw. As usual, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member if you want to support me personally. Thank you so much for watching.